Are your book sales starting to dip even just a little bit? If so, what should you do to bring them back up? Find out in this episode of Novel Marketing, the longest running book marketing podcast in the world. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to get new book promotion tips and tricks every week. And in this episode, I'm going to assume that the sales on your book were once great and now are starting to fall. If the sales were always bad, I have another episode for you to start with called What to Do When Your Book Is Not Selling. Now, before we get started, I should say that book sales always fall over time. Most best-selling books see their best sales during the pre-order window, followed by the launch month, followed by a slow and steady decline. Even for books where this is not the case at first, it becomes the reality eventually. Recency is one of the most appealing things about a book, particularly a novel, and more people win the lottery than there are novelists who write enduring bestsellers. But there are things that you can do to extend a book's life cycle, and I explore them in the episode, How to Extend Your Book's Life with Effective Marketing. But in this episode, we're going to look at the career author who has a lot of books, and the sales for all of them seem to be dipping just a bit. So with that said, let's start with the basics. You want to check to make sure the basics are working. And the most common reason for sales to decline is one of the basics has slipped. Something that you were doing right is now not happening anymore. And the first basic is simply to publish a new book. Most novelists need to publish at least one book a year to keep readers from giving up on them. Battered reader syndrome is the pain readers feel when authors they love give up on a series without finishing it. And if you don't maintain a steady pace, readers will assume you've become the next George R.R. Martin and will assume you are unwilling to continue writing. And if you need help with consistency, if you want help not being the next George R.R. Martin, I have a great episode called the Tortoise Release Method, which will give you a template for a restful way to write and launch one book per year. Now, if it's been a couple of years since your last book came out, you don't need to listen to the rest of this episode. You just need a new book to sell. That new book will give your old books a massive sales boost. But perhaps you are still writing consistently. What else should you try? Well, one thing to consider is to conclude your series. Nothing juices sales like a series completion. This is true for TV shows as well. TV shows tend to see viewership decline over time, but everybody comes back for the finale. Some battered readers won't even start book one until they know the series has a conclusion. And remember, you can always start a new series in the same story worlds. This isn't actually very risky, but it can be very valuable. Another thing to consider is to reinvest in email list growth. Once you start experiencing success, it's easy to get complacent with the email list that you have, rather than continuing to work to grow it. If your email list has been stagnant for the last year, I recommend you check out my course, the Author Email Academy. In this course, I teach you how to make your email list better, how to create the kind of emails readers want to read, and more importantly, how to continue to grow your email list month after month and year after year. And I'll give you a hint on how you can get a bargain on that course. Everyone attending the 2025 Novel Marketing Conference will have a chance to get the Author Email Academy for 80% off. Not 20% off, not 40% off, not 60% off, 80% off. Another thing I recommend that you try is to check your funnel. A common breakdown in sales has to do with a break in the sales funnel somewhere. A marketing funnel takes readers through the 3 stages of 1, knowing who you are, 2, liking you, and 3, trusting you with their money. These stages are sometimes called attract, engage, and convert. And there's a lot to unpack on those steps of the sales funnel, which I'm not going to do in this episode, but I do have a couple of episodes that will help you with it. One is called Book Marketing 101, Marketing Funnels, and the other one is actually that episode I mentioned earlier, What to Do When Your Book Is Not Selling. Because hint, if your book is not selling, likely there's a breakdown in the sales funnel or a product market mismatch. So let's say you're doing the basics right. What else should you consider? Well, the next kind of section I want to talk about is reconnecting with your existing readers. Sometimes authors get out of sync with reader expectations, and this happens when their previously happy readers get less and less excited about their books, and the sales slowly drop off. And this can be hard to notice because it happens slowly, sometimes just one reader at a time. Right? Most readers are still happy and keep saying so, while the unhappy readers quietly walk away. They're not angry, they're not leaving you negative reviews, they're just not as excited as they used to be. And if you're concerned that this is happening to you, what should you do? Well, one thing to try is connecting with readers in real life. Nothing beats interacting with readers in real life to give you a sense of who they are and what they want. A good reader event involves you listening and the readers talking. You lecturing in a hall and then flying away to your next event without talking to anyone is not a good reader event for helping you connect with readers. And there's lots of reader events happening all the time. And some of those have your readers at them. Things like fan conventions, book festivals, homeschool book fairs, library events. And if you write nonfiction, any kind of professional conference or convention around your topic of nonfiction. And I have some episodes to help with this in-person element. One is how to sell your book in person. One is Marketing 101 Place. And the third is how to get book clubs to pick your book. Another thing to try is to poll your readers. Ask your readers what they think of your book series and where it is going. Sometimes there's a small element of your story that is irritating your readers and you have no idea. And all you have to do is kill off that one annoying character and everything gets better. Your sales get reinvigorated and your readers get re-excited. I have an episode all about this called The Amazing Power of Reader Surveys. These are really fun and can be very illuminating. Another thing you might try is to read your reviews. I know. But remember, reviews don't describe your book. They describe your reader. Reviewers talk more about themselves than about your book. And the review is not a judgment of your writing, it's a glimpse into their heart. Once you realize this, reading reviews is less painful and a lot more helpful because they're describing themselves, not describing your book. Some episodes to help with this are how to find your readers and how to find your Timothy. Another thing you might try is to experiment with new pricing strategies. One way to re-engage your readers is to offer different kinds of prices. I have, 21 different pricing strategies in my episode Book Marketing 101 Price. And I also have an episode called How to Price Your Book Using Marketing Psychology. And I also have an episode called How to Use Price Pulsing to Supercharge Your Backlist. You'd be surprised just how much price can affect it. And sometimes lowering the price is the wrong thing to do. Sometimes it's the right thing to do. There's a lot of thinking that goes into this. This is something that people in the business world have spent millions, if not billions of dollars studying. I learned it in business school and I'm sharing that advice with you. So pricing is one of the 5 P's of marketing and it's a really important thing to understand. And if all you've been doing is copying what the other authors are doing, you're making a mistake because all they're doing is copying each other. And so it only takes one person to start thinking for that one person to get an advantage. So once you've reconnected with your readers, you may find that they want a deeper financial connection to your books. This won't help much with the unit sales, but it can prevent a drop in revenue. In fact, it can reverse a drop in revenue. So the first thing you might consider is to start selling direct. If you have 10,000 passionate readers who currently buy your ebook on Amazon for $7.99 and you release one book a year, that brings you $55,000 a year. If you could get half of those folks to switch to buying from you directly, you could start making $65,000 a year with basically no additional work. Once you set it up, it all runs automatically. That's a $10,000 jump just on one ebook. And I should point out here, the ebook is where Amazon offers the most generous royalty at 70%. It's even more dramatic with paper, which can be as low as 30%, and audio, which can be as low as 25%. Switching to selling direct for those mediums can dramatically increase your revenue without costing any more for your readers. And this doesn't include all of the add-ons and bonuses and premium products that you could sell that bring that number up even higher. It's not uncommon for authors who are selling directly to readers to make twice as much money per transaction on their website directly than they were making back on Amazon. Each year, readers are more willing to buy directly from authors, and each year they spend less time on Amazon. So if you're 100% focused on Amazon, don't be surprised if your sales are slipping because readers, particularly the hardcore readers, are moving away from Amazon, at least a little bit, but a little bit every year adds up. I have a bunch of episodes on this. One is how Connor Boyack sold millions of books directly to readers without using Amazon. One is called How to Sell Books Directly to Readers with Joanna Penn. And finally, Innovative Indie Marketing with SD Smith. And yes, SD Smith did a lot of direct sales. Another thing you could try is create real-life reader experiences. This is a great way to reconnect and deepen your relationship with your readers, is to create real-world events, right? This could be a mystery cruise with mystery author Jane Smith, or a Renaissance Fair fantasy meetup with fantasy author John Smith, or a training seminar with business author Joe McCoach. So obviously, what would work will depend on what you write. If you write religious books, you could do a religious event, perhaps at a church or with your denomination. There's a lot of options here, and you just need a little bit of creativity to find what kind of real-life experiences you could connect with your book. And having a chance to meet with you and connect with your book in a special way creates the kind of superfan who will want to spread the word and buy premium editions of your book. Speaking of which, make sure you're offering a premium version of your book. Your core fans may want a premium version of your book. And if that's the case, stop selling those superfans a $7.99 ebook when they would prefer to buy a $100 limited edition signed and numbered hardback. You're just leaving money on the table. And you're telling that reader, you're just a regular reader and I'm just a regular author. When that premium version can say, hey, we have a special relationship. You are one of the limited number of readers who have this premium version of my book. Premium editions tend to work best when paired with a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter, and I have a bunch of episodes on that. One is called Printing the Future, Print on Demand with Offset Quality by BookVault. In this episode, we talk about how you can use BookVault to make those premium editions of your book. I also have an episode called How to Use Scarcity and Ubiquity to Make Your Book Irresistible. And this is also connected with pricing a little bit, where having expensive and cheap versions of your book helps you make everyone happy, including your bank account. I also have an episode called How Corinne Norton Successfully Kickstarted Her Book in 1 Hour. And others. I have a lot of episodes on this topic. I have links to them in the show notes of this episode at authormedia.com/433. Now, let's say sales are good. Your readers are happy and you already have a popular series that you're selling directly on your website, but sales are still slipping. What should you do? Well, let me give you some advice that my grandmother gave me about a decade ago. I was single and frustrated about being single, and she said, Thomas, you need to go to a new church. Now, she goes to a different kind of church than I do. And at first, I thought that this was some sort of theological case, but my grandmother didn't care too much about theology, and she didn't really care what kind of church I went to. She went on to say, Thomas, you've met all of the girls at your church, and they've all met you. You need to go to a new church. So there's something to be said about fishing in new ponds. And going back to the marketing funnel, attraction tactics lose effectiveness over time as people make up their minds about you, right? None of the girls at my church wanted me. It turned out the girl who'd go on to become my wife went to a different church. So I just had to find her. And so it's critical. Now, you aren't looking for a spouse. You are looking for readers. But it is beneficial to fish in different ponds rather than fishing the same pond over and over again. So how do you do that? Well, one way is to advertise on new websites. If you've been doing all of your advertising on just one website, you may see a big surge in sales by switching to a different website. So sure, maybe X is not the number one social network for you or for your readers. Maybe most of your readers are on Instagram or Facebook. But if you've never advertised on X before and you've been advertising on Facebook for years, you may find that those Twitter ads are incredibly effective. So just shift it from one website to another. The top advertising websites on the internet are X/Twitter, Meta, which is Facebook and Instagram, and a few others, Google, which is like all of the random websites. Most websites use Google to place the ads on those websites. Amazon, YouTube, which is also part of Google, and then podcasts. I guess we could include TikTok here if they're still going to be around. I don't know. I personally do not care for TikTok, but it's its own world, and there's a lot of people on TikTok, and those people buy books just as much as anybody else. And that's the thing. We often have a bias against one of these companies. They're all evil to one degree or another, except for podcasts, perhaps, because that's not a company. So there are evil podcasts for sure, but I don't think they're all evil. I'd like to think this podcast isn't very evil. I don't know if it's possible to be 0% evil, though. But anyway, we're all fallen. Every website has its problems. Every website has its upsides, but there is something to be said about trying ads on a new website. And along those lines, guest on new podcasts. If you have been guesting on the same podcasts, you're reaching the same listeners over and over. When you go on a new podcast, you're reaching a whole new group of listeners. And I'll say new podcasts launch every week, and some of those new podcasts may have the perfect audience for you and for your book. So if you need help connecting with podcasters, consider becoming a patron of the Novel Marketing Podcast. I have a special podcast host directory that is exclusively for novel marketing patrons. And my podcast host directory has contact info for over 10,000 podcasters. It doesn't have every podcaster, but it has a lot. And it's a very useful tool for helping you get on more podcasts to talk about your book. Another thing to consider is to experiment with new book marketing ideas. There are a lot of promotion techniques out there, and it's easy to get stuck in a rut doing the same thing over and over again. Switching things up can reinvigorate sales. So what idea should you try? Well, originally I was going to rattle off a whole bunch of ideas at this point in the episode. But as I started creating the list, things got out of hand. By the time I was done, I had 101 book marketing ideas, each one with a corresponding episode of Novel Marketing talking about that specific idea. So to save your ears and to make life easier for everyone, I decided to create a free downloadable PDF with the entire list on it. And you can find that guide, 101 book marketing ideas that will change your life, at authormedia.com/433. I do hope you download that because I spent a surprising amount of time on it because I just couldn't stop. Another thing to try is to travel to new places. People live in bubbles, and those bubbles are cultural, religious, political, and demographic, just to start. But the second biggest or most powerful bubble is regional. And this is self-evident. Most of the people you regularly interact with live within 100 miles of you, and most of those people live within 10 miles of you. If you're not convinced, answer me this question. How many people do you know who live in Detroit? It's the 14th largest media market in the country. There may be thousands of Detroiters who would love to read your book if only they knew about it. And what about Phoenix or San Antonio, Boston, or Denver? Right, there's a lot of places in this world that are not the place that you are from, and those places are filled with people who love to read your book. For a long time, most of my listeners came from the western states of the United States of America, despite the fact that most of the U.S. population lives in the East. Why? Because I was doing most of my speaking along the West Coast. And podcast listening and books are the same in that they primarily grow through word of mouth. And the word of mouth is triggered by physical proximity. And since I was traveling and meeting lots of people on the West Coast, those people were telling their friends about my podcast, while people on the East Coast were not hearing about novel marketing, often for years. If you are on the East Coast right now, how long have you been listening? Chances are not as long as my listeners on the West Coast, because that regional bubble is so powerful. And because I started having children and stopped traveling before I had a chance to do much traveling in the East Coast. So I've not spoken at most of the Eastern conferences, while I've spoken at many of the Western conferences. So place is very powerful, and I have some episodes that explain this in more detail. There's Marketing 101 Place. Place is one of the 5 P's of marketing. Another is How to Write for American Readers, a guide to the different American regional cultures. This is an interesting episode that I spent an embarrassing amount of time researching for. That's all about the different mega regions in the United States and how those readers are different and how their expectations are different and how to reach them and write books that will appeal to them. It's a really fun episode. I enjoyed discussing it. But there's actually a bubble even bigger and more powerful than the regional bubble, and that is the language bubble. Now, people can live in the exact same town, but if they don't speak the same language, they live in entirely different literary and cultural worlds. Some authors find that they are more popular in some other country than they are at home. But this is hard to predict, and it's very risky, right? There's hundreds of countries and thousands of languages, and converting your book into another language is super expensive. And most of those languages might buy dozens of copies of your book, which is no good if you spend a few $1,000s on the translation. But if a lot of your readers are requesting a Hungarian translation or a Portuguese translation for your book, consider giving it to them. You may find that there's a whole world outside of your world that loves your writing. A cheaper way to reach new readers than translating it into another language is to make sure that you're in all of the formats. There are a lot of readers, like me, who only listen to audiobooks. Other readers only read ebooks, while others only read paper. Authors tend to be ambivalent. They'll do all three, or they're more likely to be that way. So it's easy to assume that readers are the same way. But readers often have a very strong preference when it comes to format. And a lot of authors make the mistake of launching their book without all three primary formats. In fact, sometimes they'll go years without adding an audiobook. And sometimes all you need to do to reinvigorate sales is just offer something to the audiobook only people like me. So if you've been missing one of those formats, this really simple thing is to make sure your book is in all the formats. Audio has never been cheaper and easier than it is right now. And readers will respect you. Even the paper and the ebook readers will respect you more if you offer an audiobook version. Another way to reach new readers is to add retail options, right? Think outside of Amazon. Where else can you sell your book? What kind of stores would want to stock your book, right? You might consider going wide with the ebook, but you definitely want to go wide with your paper book. And as you're going wide with your paper book, go super wide. Think outside of the bookstore. Gift shops, pet stores, nail salons, all of those can sell your book. Maybe not your book, right? Maybe your book would appeal more to a computer store or sell better at a Renaissance festival. Listen to my episode on place. I have a lot of ideas of places where you can sell books and make a lot of money. And your competition is much lower because if you're the only books at the gas station or the coffee shop, it's a choice between buying your book or not buying a book at all. Oh, and don't forget libraries. I have a whole episode on how to get your book, even if you're indie, into libraries. Another idea is this is probably the riskiest idea that I'll talk about this episode, but it's to target new Timothys. So before you freak out, let me explain. Back in the day, My Little Pony was primarily targeted at young girls. But in 2010, MLP started getting popular with college-aged men. These bronies added an entirely new audience, and a much wealthier audience, I will say, and they led to a massive surge in spending on My Little Pony. And this was a huge windfall for the company because a 22-year-old man has a lot more spending power than an 8-year-old girl. Now, when looking for a new Timothy to target, you'll get the best results targeting underserved readers. And in fact, 22-year-old men are incredibly underserved. If they're desperate for My Little Pony, what else would they be desperate for? And for more on this, listen to my episode, How Larry Correia Became a Mega Bestseller by Writing for Overlooked Readers. Now, warning. When you target new readers, you do it with your advertising, not with your writing. Keep one Timothy in your crosshairs. What the bronies wanted was authentic My Little Pony made for little girls. They didn't want My Little Pony made for 20-year-old guys. If you want to target a different Timothy with your writing, write a different book. But you can have a bullseye on one person, and that book can be appealing to more than one kind of person. Another example is, say, the Twilight books, which was written for teenage girls but became popular with middle-aged women. So you'll often find if you can really thrill one group, it will spread to very different groups. So one more thing, as we're talking about things that can cause sales to slip with your book, it may be your sales are slipping and it has nothing to do with your book. And instead, it has to do with culture and how culture changes over time. Right? Commercials that made you tear up decades ago make you cringe today. The ad didn't change, but when you watch it on YouTube today, it just hits a little different because you have changed. And what is true for individuals is also true for culture. This cultural moment, there's a word for it called zeitgeist. And your book needs to be in sync with the zeitgeist. And the zeitgeist is always shifting. And what's interesting is that it's shifting on a predictable and observed rhythm. Right? King Solomon saw this rhythm when he talked about there being nothing new under the sun. The Romans saw it, and they called it the saeculum. Modern historians and anthropologists still track this saeculum or secular cycle. Modern academics call the cultural shift a secular cycle. Maybe you've heard people talk about a secular crisis. And last year, in 2023, we shifted into a new phase of the secular cycle known as the fourth turning. And I suspect this is part of the reason why a lot of Hollywood films are flopping. A lot of major video games are flopping because they were created for the third turning of the saeculum, and now we are in the fourth turning. So how will the fourth turning impact authors and writing? Well, I'm working on an entire episode to answer that question. So right now I just want to tease it because it's going to be a lot of work and I have no idea how to title that episode. Right? So I'm like, writing your book for the cultural zeitgeist. No one's going to listen to that episode. So if you have some good ideas on good title ideas for that episode on adapting your book for the current cultural moment, do shoot me an email, thomas@authormedia.com. Our featured patron today is Peter DeHaan, author of Women of the Bible. The Bible is filled with stories of fascinating women. Dig into their lives to uncover how these remarkable women rise above their circumstances in a society that too often pushes them down. Women of the Bible is written by Peter DeHaan, and the audiobook is narrated by James L. Rubart. Get your copy today. And a quick personal update. We've had a lot of extended family around the last couple of weeks to see our new baby girl, who is just so cute. She doesn't sleep at night, but she is cute as a bug, or cute as a button. I don't know. She's really cute. And an interesting side effect of our extended family being in town has been on our other children. I've learned to understand my 2-year-old's toddler dialect. It's not an accent. It's full-on dialect. But if you know how he pronounces words, you can figure it out. And it helps that most of the things that he talks about are about events where I was present. And so I already know what he's trying to say, and so I can figure out what he's saying. But that's not true with his grandparents. They don't understand his dialect quite so well, and they weren't there in the room when he fell down and skinned his knee. And so it's harder for my toddler to tell his grandmother a story than it is for him to tell me that story. And this causes some real suffering. And this challenge that he's facing forces him to work harder at pronouncing all of the sounds in a word so that he can be understood. And these difficulties lead to breakthroughs in his language development. We notice when our children are around their grandparents for extended periods of time, particularly without us there to translate, they come back talking more clearly with a better control of the English language. And many challenges in life are like this. They are opportunities to improve. So next time you face some suffering, instead of whining about it or trying to make it go away, simply ask, what does this season of suffering have to teach me? You may find the suffering makes you a better writer, just like my toddler is becoming better at talking. The Novel Marketing Podcast is a production of authormedia.com. You can find the blog version of this episode along with a link to the 101 book marketing ideas that will change your life at authormedia.com/433. I'm Thomas Umstattd Jr. saying thank you for listening and live long and prosper.